Somewhere in your medical file, next to your allergies and your emergency contact number sits 2 letters and 1 small symbol. O positive. You have probably said it out loud 100 times without thinking twice about it. A nurse asks, you answer, and the conversation moves on. Oh, but that little label is not a random tag invented by a hospital clerk. It is a piece of code that has been running inside living bodies for millions of years, and new DNA research is now showing just how deep that code really goes. If you carry O-positive blood, what scientists are uncovering right now is, in a very real sense, uncovering you. Let's start with the part almost nobody explains properly. Everyone learns the 4 basic groups A, B, AB, and O, plus the positive or negative Rh factor stacked on top. Then the explanation usually stops, as if that's the whole story, just a hospital classification system and nothing more. But the truth is far bigger than that. The genetic system behind human blood types did not begin in a laboratory. It began roughly 20 million years ago, in a shared ancestor of humans and other primates. 20 million years is not a typo. That number is almost impossible to picture. Entire civilizations have risen and vanished within a few thousand years. Ice ages come and go across tens of thousands of years. Yet this blood type system has been quietly operating, generation after generation, since long before Homo sapiens existed, long before any upright walking ancestor of ours ever took a step. A biological system does not survive that long by accident. Evolution is ruthless about deleting anything that isn't earning its keep. If something survives across 20 million years without being erased, it means that system is doing something essential. Now here's where it gets interesting for anyone with type O. Among the blood types, O is considered the oldest, the original template that came first, long before A and B branched off in response to new environments and new populations. That places O in a different category than just one option among 4. It is the starting point, the base model everything else was eventually built on top of. And this isn't just a poetic idea, it has a real physical explanation. Once you look at how blood typing actually works on a molecular level. Most descriptions of blood type stop at surface concepts, antigens, antibodies, a compatibility chart taped to a hospital wall. The real mechanism underneath is much more remarkable. Every red blood cell carries molecular markers on its surface, tiny protein flags that act almost like an ID badge. Your immune system reads these flags constantly, every second, deciding in real time what belongs inside your body and what doesn't. The exact pattern of these flags is fully determined by your DNA, a code passed down to you unbroken through a chain of ancestors reaching back millions of years. What makes type O different is what it is missing. O-type cells don't carry the A marker. They don't carry the B marker either. Instead, they carry only the most basic structure underneath, known as the H antigen. That H structure is the raw, unmodified foundation. Type A and type B blood are essentially the same base structure, but with extra molecular decorations added on top. In other words, if you have type O blood, you are carrying the original, unedited version. Everyone else's blood type is, in a very literal chemical sense, a modified copy of what you already have. Sit with that for a second. Because scientists working right now in transfusion labs are not chasing this idea out of curiosity. They are chasing it because of its clinical value. Converting other blood types into type O could open doors to faster organ transplants, less risk of transplant rejection, and safer transfusions overall. Researchers have spent years trying to build enzymes that strip away the extra sugar molecules on type A blood cells, essentially trying to manually recreate what a type O body already produces naturally, without any help. Think about what that means. The biggest breakthrough medicine is chasing in blood. Conversion technology is simply trying to copy what your body does automatically, for free, every day of your life. But this story doesn't stay contained inside a lab. Type O blood is woven directly into your cardiovascular health, your infection resistance, and according to newer research, possibly even into how your brain and nervous system respond to stress. For decades, scientists have studied the link between blood type and disease outcomes. But the precision of that research has jumped dramatically as DNA sequencing technology has advanced. And what that improved precision reveals is a picture of O-positive blood that goes far beyond the simple compatibility chart most of us memorized in school. Start with the heart. People with type O blood tend to have a noticeably lower risk of heart attack. The reason traces back to 2 specific clotting proteins in the blood, factor VIII and von Willebrand factor. When these proteins circulate at high levels, they raise the chances of dangerous clots forming inside your arteries, the exact kind of clots responsible for many heart attacks and strokes. Type O carriers naturally produce these clotting proteins at lower levels. That protection isn't something you built through diet or exercise. It's baked directly into your DNA. The ancestors who happened to carry this trait were statistically more likely to survive cardiovascular strain that killed others around them, and they passed that survival advantage straight down the line to you. Of course, no blood type gets to have every advantage with none of the downsides. People with O blood show more vulnerability to certain other conditions, including a higher susceptibility to diseases like cholera, along with a somewhat increased risk for pancreatic cancer and stomach ulcers. This isn't a design flaw, it's simply how evolutionary trade-offs work. No blood type is a perfect shield against everything, because each type was shaped by a very specific set of environmental pressures that your ancestors happened to face. Understanding your own profile, both strengths and weaknesses accurately, is far more useful than pretending any blood type is invincible. And the pattern of vulnerabilities in type O blood isn't random either. It tells a very specific story about exactly which threats your ancestors were built to survive and which ones they simply weren't optimized against. One of the clearest examples is malaria. People with type O blood show a striking natural resistance to severe malaria infection, largely because the parasites responsible for the disease have a harder time attaching to O-type red blood cells. This protection is powerful enough that type O frequency is noticeably higher in regions where malaria has historically been a major killer. This is natural selection playing out in real, observable human populations today. In areas across Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, where malaria has shaped survival for thousands of years, type O became the dominant blood type, simply because carriers were more likely to live long enough to have children of their own. In other words, your blood type is a literal biological receipt, proof of a survival transaction your ancestors made thousands of years ago, long before anyone understood what a blood type even was. This brings us to genuinely cutting-edge science, the part where ancient DNA enters the picture. For most of history, researchers could only study blood types in living populations. They could spot patterns, note correlations with disease, and make educated guesses about evolutionary history, but they had no way to actually look backward in time. They couldn't examine the blood type genes of people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. That limitation is now gone. Scientists have successfully studied genome sequences pulled from dozens of ancient individuals, Homo sapiens, who lived somewhere between roughly 46,000 and 16,000 years ago, Neanderthals, from around 120,000 to 40,000 years ago, and even a mixed ancestry individual believed to descend from both Neanderthals and Denisovans, dated to about 98,000 years ago. This isn't guesswork or theoretical modeling. This is direct genetic analysis pulled from ancient bones. And the story, locked inside that ancient DNA, is extraordinary. Blood type evolution wasn't some slow, uniform drift happening the same way everywhere. It was targeted. It responded quickly and directly to whatever environment a population found itself in. As early Homo sapiens groups migrated out of Africa somewhere between 70,000 and 45,000 years ago and spread across Eurasia, entirely new blood type variants appeared and locked themselves into these traveling populations. Researchers examining these ancient genomes found that essentially every individual studied carried a unique combination of blood group variants, something they genuinely did not expect to see appear that quickly on an evolutionary timescale. One of the more striking discoveries involves the Persian Plateau, the region sitting between the Zagros Mountains and modern-day Iran. Archaeological evidence suggests that early human groups leaving Africa paused in this region for somewhere around 15,000 years before continuing their migration onward. Researchers now believe that stretch of time functioned almost like a genetic incubation period, long enough for new blood type variants found only outside Africa to emerge and stabilize before those populations pushed further into Asia and beyond. Picture it as a 15,000-year testing ground, where human biology was being pressure tested against unfamiliar climates, unfamiliar diseases, and unfamiliar living conditions, and whatever genetic combinations happened to help people survive got carried forward into the next generation. The blood running through your veins today was, in part, forged inside that ancient testing ground. This isn't just distant history disconnected from your present body. The genetic variants selected during that ancient period are still active in you right now. The same molecular machinery that helped your ancestors survive famine, plague, and unfamiliar pathogens is still running quietly inside your immune system today, still shaping your cardiovascular function, still influencing how your body handles infection and physical stress. The only real difference is that for the first time in human history, we finally have the tools to read those mechanisms with molecular precision. And the discoveries keep coming. Researchers from the UK and Israel spent nearly 20 years chasing down the genetic cause of a mysterious blood anomaly first noticed back in the early 1970s, when a pregnant woman's blood sample was found to be missing a surface marker that almost everyone else has. That decades-long investigation finally paid off, leading to the identification of an entirely new blood group system named May-L, officially announced in 2024. As of that point, the International Society of Blood Transfusion recognized 47 separate human blood group systems. Then, in 2025, a woman from Guadeloupe was found to carry a genuinely unique blood profile, missing a surface antigen that virtually every other human being carries, traced to mutations in a gene now linked to a newly confirmed 48th blood group system. The science here is not finished. It is actively accelerating, and every fresh discovery adds another layer to what researchers understand about the much older foundational systems, including the type O group. Now, let's talk about something the mainstream conversation around blood type almost never touches: the connection to COVID-19. The pandemic became, without anyone intending it, one of the largest natural experiments in blood type immunology ever recorded. Billions of people exposed to the same virus across hundreds of countries, layered on top of decades of existing blood type data. What that data revealed was significant. Multiple studies found that people with type O blood, along with people who are Rh negative, showed a somewhat lower chance of testing positive for the virus in the first place. The likely mechanism ties back to inflammation and clotting behavior. People with type A blood tend to naturally carry higher levels of von Willebrand factor than people with type O blood. When the virus damaged the lining of blood vessels, that higher clotting factor made the resulting immune response more dangerous, contributing to strokes, kidney complications, and dangerous blood clots in the lungs for some patients. People with type O blood, thanks to their naturally lower levels of that same clotting protein, appeared to have some natural buffering against the most severe vascular complications of the disease. Nobody predicted this connection ahead of time. It only became visible after researchers studied millions of real-world cases. It's one more chapter in a much older story, showing how the molecular structure of type O blood offers protective advantages that were written into human DNA long before the pathogen it happened to defend against ever existed. This raises something worth sitting with for a moment. Your immune system, in this particular sense, doesn't learn its defenses during your lifetime. It inherits them. These protections weren't built through your personal exposure and adaptation over the years. They were already present the moment you were conceived, encoded in DNA passed down from your parents, who inherited it from their parents, in an unbroken chain stretching back to the very first members of our species. Every one of those inherited defenses represents a battle that someone before you actually fought and survived. The numbers around O-positive blood make this even more striking once you look closely. More than a third of the entire global population carries type O-positive blood, and in Central and South America, that number climbs to nearly the whole population. That geographic concentration isn't random. The populations of Central and South America descend from small groups who crossed from Asia into the Americas during the last ice age, roughly 15 to 20,000 years ago, moving across a land bridge in what is now the Bering Strait region. These were small bands of people pushing through extreme cold, facing unfamiliar diseases, and cut off from the rest of humanity for long stretches of time. And whatever genetic filtering process operated across those thousands of years of migration converged almost entirely on a single blood type. That kind of pattern doesn't happen by chance. It's the fingerprint of intense survival pressure, visible today in the genetics of entire populations. O-positive blood specifically is found in roughly 37% of people worldwide. And because it can be given to every Rh-positive recipient, A positive, B positive, AB positive, and O positive alike, it plays a critical role in emergency medicine. Yet, ironically, it's also constantly in short supply. Hospitals need it more than almost any other type, partly because it's the most common blood type overall, and partly because O negative, the true universal donor type, is essential for emergency transfusions and for newborns with fragile immune systems. There's a strange paradox buried in that fact. The most common blood type on the planet is also the one hospitals can never seem to stockpile enough of. When someone arrives in an emergency room bleeding and there's no time to run a blood type test, type O is what saves them. Demand never really slows down and supply never quite catches up. There's a deeper meaning hiding inside that medical dependency too. It isn't purely logistical, it's historical. Every time a hospital relies on type O blood in an emergency, it is, in a very literal sense, leaning on the oldest immune architecture in human evolutionary history to keep someone alive. Long before anyone understood genetics, before anyone had a name for antigens or antibodies, this blood type was already carrying people through crisis after crisis. The oldest solution in the story is, even now, still the most dependable one. Looking ahead, the science here is genuinely uncertain and genuinely consequential. Enzyme-based research on blood conversion is moving quickly. Scientists have identified enzymes capable of trimming away the extra sugar structures that distinguish type A blood from type O blood, raising the real possibility of converting type A blood into universal type O blood on a clinical scale. If that research eventually succeeds at scale, it could reshape the global blood supply entirely, easing the chronic shortage hospitals deal with every single year. Notice the direction of that conversion, though. It isn't converting blood toward type A or type B. It's converting other types toward O, toward the oldest, most original configuration nature produced first. There's something almost poetic in that. Despite every advance in gene editing, CRISPR technology, and next-generation sequencing, the target researchers are working toward is the exact blood configuration nature had already perfected in human bodies long before recorded history began. The research doesn't stop at the molecular level either. Broader genomic studies pulled from ancient DNA are reshaping how scientists understand human biological diversity as a whole. The largest study of ancient human DNA to date, involving genetic material from more than 15,000 ancient individuals, found that human evolution has actually sped up over just the past 10,000 years, with clear evidence of natural selection acting on hundreds of genes tied to immunity, skin tone, behavior, and other traits. 10,000 years isn't ancient history in evolutionary terms, it's practically yesterday. That's the window during which agriculture emerged, cities were built, populations exploded in size, and pathogens evolved rapidly in response to denser human living conditions. The immune systems being shaped and reshaped during that period, blood type variants included, were responding in real time to a disease landscape that human civilization itself was creating. You are, quite literally, a living outcome of that ongoing selection process. The blood group discoveries of the last 2 years only add more texture to this picture. The MAL blood group system, confirmed through research published in a major hematology journal, was the product of a genuinely collaborative multi-institution effort. The specific protein involved turned out to be unusually small and difficult to pin down, requiring several separate lines of investigation before researchers had enough proof to confirm it. As it stands now, there are 48 recognized human blood group systems in total, and each one represents its own unique set of surface proteins, its own evolutionary backstory, its own pattern of inheritance, and its own implications for immune function and disease risk. What scientists understand about blood type today is dramatically more advanced than what was known even a decade ago, and everything suggests the next 10 years will push that understanding even further. For anyone carrying O-positive blood specifically, this accelerating research carries real significance. Type O isn't just the most common blood type in the world, it's also the most heavily studied and the oldest. In a sense, it's the reference point every other blood type gets measured against, because it's the original configuration everything else eventually diverged from. The full story of blood type evolution really is a story of human adaptation. As early Homo sapiens left Africa and pushed into radically different environments, their blood types adapted right alongside them, shaped by new climates, new diseases, and even genetic exchange with Neanderthals along the way. Each new discovery in this field adds another layer to what we understand about resilience, migration, and survival at the most basic biological level. That journey, starting with the first modern humans leaving Africa, passing through that 15,000-year genetic incubator on the Persian Plateau, crossing the Ice Age corridors of Central Asia, and eventually reaching the deep isolation of populations in the Americas, is still written into how blood types are distributed across the globe today. You can trace ancient human migration almost like a map, simply by looking at how blood type frequencies shift from one population to the next. And wherever you look, type O keeps showing up as the common thread, the oldest signal, the most persistent pattern running through the earliest chapters of the human story. So what does all of this actually mean for you, practically today? It means your blood type deserves to be understood as something far bigger than a line on a hospital form used for transfusion matching. The cardiovascular advantages, the specific resistance to certain infections, the particular vulnerabilities to others, none of that is folklore. It's a measurable biological outcome of millions of years of evolutionary pressure, now visible in precise molecular detail thanks to modern DNA technology. As personalized medicine keeps advancing and genetic sequencing keeps getting cheaper and faster, your blood type will increasingly be treated not as a standalone fact, but as one thread inside a much larger picture of your full genetic inheritance. And there's something else worth sitting with, something the raw clinical data doesn't quite capture on its own. You're not the first person to carry this blood. You're simply the latest link in an unbroken chain of carriers stretching back further than written history, further than any known civilization, further back than spoken language itself. Every person who ever shared your blood type and survived a famine, a plague, a war, an epidemic, passed something forward. Not a memory, not a story, but a physical molecular configuration that kept them alive long enough to have children. And that same configuration is still quietly running inside you right now, doing exactly the work it has always done, mostly without you ever noticing. Research in this area is only speeding up. Every year the picture of what blood type really means at a genetic level gets sharper, more detailed, and more relevant to actual clinical care. It's likely that the next decade will bring discoveries that reshape how medicine approaches blood typing altogether, moving well past basic transfusion compatibility and into a deeper understanding of how blood type connects to immune response, disease risk, drug reactions, and possibly even aspects of cognitive health. But based on everything DNA research has already revealed, here's where things currently stand. If you carry O-positive blood, you're not just walking around with a common biological label. You are carrying one of the oldest surviving immune blueprints in the entire history of human evolution, a molecular record of nearly every major survival pressure that shaped the Homo sapiens lineage from its earliest days on this planet. You're carrying the blood configuration that nature built first, tested for longer than any other, and spread more widely across the human species than any of its later variations. The original template. Everything else was eventually written from. The question science hasn't fully answered yet, and honestly may take years to answer, is what else might be encoded in that original template that current technology still can't detect. What other biological advantages, what other hidden resistances, what other subtle evolutionary gifts are sitting inside the structure of type O blood, waiting for the right tools to finally read them. Researchers working with ancient DNA with enzyme-based blood conversion, with next-generation blood group genotyping, are actively pulling back the edges of something enormous. They can sense the outline of it, but the complete picture is still coming into focus. Think for a second about how strange that actually is. We live in an era where scientists can sequence a full human genome in a matter of hours, where gene editing tools can rewrite specific letters of DNA with surgical precision, where machine learning models can predict protein structures that used to take years of lab work to figure out. And yet, one of the biggest open questions in all of this advanced science is still, at its core, about a two-letter label most of us learn to say without ever really thinking about it. That gap between how simple the label feels and how deep the underlying biology actually goes is exactly what makes this such a compelling area of research right now. It also says something about how science tends to work in general. The biggest breakthroughs don't always come from chasing something brand new. Sometimes they come from going back and looking more carefully at something so familiar that everyone stopped questioning it decades ago. Blood type is one of those things. It sat quietly in the background of medicine for over a century, mostly reduced to a simple compatibility chart, while the deeper genetic story underneath it waited for the right technology to come along and reveal it properly. That technology has finally arrived, and it's rewriting what we thought we already understood. And that's exactly why the story isn't finished yet. The blood moving through your body right now is older than history itself, older than any language used to describe it, and the researchers studying it today are really just beginning to catch up with what your own cells have known and been doing all along.